Dev Shapiro here for Dallas VideoFest and Selig Film News. We're here with Goran Smith, who has several projects in the film. So let's start about your short, that's the postcode short that's in this festival this year.
That would be Just as Cigars, playing tomorrow, Sunday, on October 19th. It's the warm-up act for the Francois Truffaut documentary, Conversation with Francois Truffaut.
So tell us a little bit about the short and why you thought it was important to make.
Well, it is an idea that's been rolling around in my head for a while, and the inspiration for this was a discussion I had with some fellow film geeks after attending a screening of The Maltese Falcon back at the beginning of the summer. And there's a famous bit of symbolism in The Maltese Falcon, which I won't go into too much here, but we talked about we certainly weren't the first ones to notice it. It's been written about for a long time, and we discussed that and some other famous examples of that in other Hollywood films made during what I would call the censorship era, which was from the enforcement of the Hays Code in 1934 until late 60s, roughly 67, 68, when all the taboos started falling away. Filmmakers didn't have to be sneaky about it anymore, but during that time, they got away with quite a few verbal and visual symbols injected into their films to thumb their nose at the Hays Code or get around it in one way or another.
Why don't you think that the censor board, why don't you think they picked up on it?
Well, one reason would be that most of the time films were submitted to the censorship board strictly as a written script. The way something is written out in a written script may not look the least bit symbolic or erotic or salacious or suggestive. All had to do with the way the filmmaker filmed it, edited it, the inflection the actors gave the line or something like that, the emphasis they gave to it, which brought a whole new meaning to it.
Do you think that the Hays Code, which is, the production code, do you think that it forced filmmakers to become a little bit more creative in getting their message across?
Yeah, I think so. It's in fact been a long argument as to were movies better before or after the code, in which they had to be a lot more crafty and a lot more subtle about delivering those kind of messages. It's certainly great to see the art they went to at that, from low-budget films to films from major studios by the likes of Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick and John Huston and Howard Hawks and a lot of great directors. And I one of the things in my film is a bit from one of the very first films from Francis Ford Coppola, which I think will surprise a lot of folks.
So you talk about the big studios like Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, you had Universal, you had Columbia, you had Warner Brothers. So talk a little bit about, I know you're one of the smartest film historians I know in Dallas, and we'll talk a little bit about somebody like Kroger Babb, who didn't really submit their films to the production code and started this exploitation or grindhouse film. So talk a little bit about that and why they got away with it, but the big majors didn't.
Well, yeah, the people cranking out little independent or producing little independent exploitation films like Kroger Babb's, like oh God, the names are gonna elude me right now.
Darwin Esper.
Dwayne Esper was the other one I was trying to think of, with Maniac and Sex Madness and the other ones he put out. They did not have to be submitted for the code. They were made outside of Hollywood entirely, pretty much. Self-distributed by these guys, but they were known for incredible promotional rackets they would do, like fake doctors, fake nurses who would attend the screenings in case you fainted at the sight of a birth in Mom and Dad, or
pass out these little health pamphlets so they could be educational films.
Passing out, warnings that you had to be 18 or with your parent to see the film, even if it was at a drive-in.
Yeah.
Of course they were all actors and actresses.
Well, also too, what was funny is that they're in, as you said, they're in drive-in movies. So these exploitation films were on these 50, 60-foot screens with traffic going by. So anybody on the hill back behind the movie theater could really see what it was.
And I'm old enough to remember when, drive-ins in Dallas and in my hometown of Lubbock would be showing R-rated movies that would stop traffic, and, they had to put lights on the sides of the screen to try to keep people from doing that, or just pulling up beside the theater and watching. Yes.
Yeah, those were the days. So talk a little bit about how research with your short. I know that you have an extensive film library. As I said, you're one of the smartest guys that I talk to about film here in Dallas. I really enjoy our conversations.
Well, I was absolutely useless at sports as a kid, so I had to, fill that with something. So, yeah. A lot of it was just stuff I had known about, read about over the years, seen with my own eyes that were, I don't think, there's not a single example, and there are examples from 16 Hollywood films and cartoons in my short subject. I wasn't the first person to think of any of them, to think of that scene, any of them. And I researched this just to make sure, I wasn't making something out of nothing. But no, everything in there has been the subject of criticism or film scholarly discourse, tongue-in-cheek or otherwise, over the years.
So you did a lot of research, and is there, I've seen the movie. I think it could be made into a feature. Are your plans to make it into a feature?
Oh, that's certainly possible. I actually put it together in a fairly short amount of time, and after this discussion with these friends of mine, and I certainly left a lot of things out, plenty enough to fill up a feature length at least an hour, and I'm certainly gonna consider that. I had specific guidelines of between 1935 and 1967 and major Hollywood features, not features from Great Britain or elsewhere, or the independent ones, the small independent ones either, but that could certainly go in a longer version.
What I really found interesting is about you're touching on a subject that's not really touched on. You get a lot of documentaries on pre-code, you got a lot of documentaries on exploitation titles, but not really about the production code and how they were creatively got around the production code. So I would really like to see that as a feature.
And that's another reason I've made it, because I haven't seen one like that either. There's certainly been mentions of individual scenes. In fact, the scene in the Maltese Falcon that got this whole thing started, although I'd undoubtedly seen it as a kid and such, it was actually mentioned on Roger Ebert's At the Movies show after other critics had taken it over and he was still producing it. I think it was Richard, what's his name, Roper?
Yeah.
Richard Roper mentioned it once and actually showed the clip. I went, oh, interesting. But never put this in a feature or even a short documentary, a bunch of them at a time to look at. So.
I think you'll do well as a feature. So let's move on. So a lot of people know you for your classic film and B-movie trivia, but not a lot of people know that you put together tribute films for film festivals. So tell us about the tribute film you put together for Harry Shearer and the process that went into it.
Yeah, shown last night, had a almost 11-minute tribute reel for Harry Shearer, and it was unusual in its length. I don't usually make them that long because you have to make one that long, you have to have pretty dynamite material that's going to hold people's attention. We had that with Harry Shearer. I like to, in producing these reels, and I've been doing them for about 20 years now, is find stuff that people didn't know about, had never seen before. The stuff that everybody expects to see, for one thing, but also the stuff they don't expect to see that they weren't aware that.
What did you put into that tribute reel last night that you thought was going to blow the audience away that they didn't know about him?
Well, probably some of the stuff he did as a kid. Starting with Abbott and Costello Go to Mars from 1953. Yes, the same Harry Shearer who does half of the voices on The Simpsons and was in Spinal Tap. Started out as a child actor in several TV shows and a few feature films of the 1950s.
So what was the research process in going to this, and where did you get your material from?
Well, good old Internet Movie Database makes this a lot easier these days.
You don't have to have large books anymore, right?
I mean, before that came along, I was doing this research in the library and out of books, and I still have stacks and stacks of movie reference books. I'm not sure what to do with now, but yes, good old IMDb. And then I'll look at YouTube first to see if a lot of the rare stuff is on there. Usually the quality is way too poor to use. Occasionally the quality is acceptable. In fact, there was at least one clip I used last night that was from YouTube, and it wasn't great quality, but the audio part of it was so great I wanted to use it from Fernwood Tonight, from when he was on Fernwood Tonight. Other than that, the facilities like Netflix of making finding rare titles a lot easier. Netflix, Amazon.com. Sometimes if I can't rent it, I'll buy it from Amazon. in the process of some others right now for the Dallas Film Society and for the Fort Lauderdale Film Festival, who I've been producing these for 20 years, that finding some rare stuff.
Besides last night, what has been one of the funnest tribute reels to put together? What sticks out in your mind?
Oh gosh, some of them I wasn't actually there when they played. I just sent them off to festivals. I'll tell you a funny story about that. I wished I had been there, but I did one for Christopher Plummer. Christopher Plummer is notoriously high maintenance and very, very picky about his work. He does not like to see undue attention given to the sound of music. I heard the following day, he was pleased with the tribute reel I did for him. He doesn't like gush with joy over anything,
right,
but he was pleased with it. And here's how I know that, in addition to the fact that he said, that's fine, whatever. Like a month later, he was at the Film Forum in New York City, and I read about all this. They started a tribute reel that somebody had done for him there. He so hated it, he insisted they turn it off before it was even finished.
Wow.
He insisted, he got so mad, insisted they turn it off. So after I read that story, I felt like adding a little line that say something like the Christopher Plummer seal of approval to my work.
So let's talk about the other project you have in the festival this year.
Well, one was a PSA. I do other things. The PSA that I had in the Doing the Right Thing PSA compilation last week. I had three things, and one was the tribute for Harry Shearer, and getting together some other pieces of his that we showed along with the tribute. So that was a lot of fun. If I didn't greatly enjoy this, I wouldn't do it.
I know. So what do you really enjoy about being a film historian and doing these tribute reels and being an archivist?
Well, it's not something everybody does. I make the distinction between a film historian and film buff. Everybody's a film buff now.
Yeah,
everybody
is.
Internet's made that easy.
Turner Classic Movies,
200
Netflix.
cable channels, and I love Turner Classic Movies. Absolutely love it. Someone who spends a lot of time researching it actually makes some money out of it, being paid for that knowledge, paid for the research, and getting hired by various people to do research, not just on feature films, but also documentaries, short subjects. I collect them. I get hired to do this work for commercials, for documentaries, things like that. That's a film historian.
Right.
Someone who lectures on it, someone who collects, someone who's constantly doing the research.
I've always seen you as a film historian and an archivist because, I know you do collect these clips and stuff like that. So if somebody wants to get into classic films, let's say they're, young, old, whatever, somebody wants to get into classic films, what are the top 3 films that they must see first?
Citizen Kane.
All right.
Casablanca. The original King Kong, I think, would be the 3. And there are many others, but those would be the 3 I would insist that they watch in a theater.
Right. So you're also, you very well known as being a B film historian.
Yeah.
And I think that's really cool. I've actually really gotten into B films over the last couple of years because of Roku and public domain channels and stuff like that. So tell us a little bit about your attraction to B films.
All my life long it has been. As a kid, I loved the films that came out of American International Pictures and Hammer Studios out of England. And I never missed the double bill at the local theater or at the drive-in. And also, I spent almost 20 years working in the home video industry. I was one of the very first employees of Blockbuster, and one of the first and one of the longest employees of Blockbuster. I worked for them in Dallas and in Florida, and was their resident historian. As you know, I wrote the blurbs on the back I wrote all the synopses on the back of the boxes. And B movies are just fun to study because they're so outrageous. Which is why I have in Just a Cigar, which is, by the way, a supposed Sigmund Freud quote.
Right.
Whether or not he actually said it. I do have one B movie represented, and that's the one by Francis Ford Coppola, which was called Battle Beyond the Sun. The stories behind the making of them are so much fun, too. He was hired by Roger Corman, who he'd been doing crew work for And Corman bought a couple of Russian sci-fi epics, Soviet sci-fi epics, and cut several movies together just using the footage from them. He and some other people, like Peter Bogdanovich, he hired, and Coppola, to cut together some movies he could promote, sell to the drive-ins, redub voices, use the effects footage. There's several of them. One of them is Battle Beyond the Sun, the one that Coppola did, which he and another famous B-movie director, Jack Hill, shot some very amusing original footage for, which you'll see.
And a lot of times they were shot in the Philippines because, you know, it was cheap labor,
right,
and the Army, you know, was involved.
These B-movie makers have made a lot of use of cheap labor at places like the Philippines, which is why so many AIP exploitation movies shot in the
Marcus said,
Philippines.
you know, I have the Army, come on down, you know, I'll give you the Army and stuff. So.
It's like most of those women in film movies you saw at the drive-ins were women in prison, I meant to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, women in film. I have friends with women in film. I wasn't trying to draw a comparison. Women in prison movies were made in the Philippines.
Because the labor was cheap, and, you know, they could make really good budget films for a very cheap price, and they cranked them out in the 60s and 70s.
It also helps that I've lived in Florida and Texas, two states with wonderful, rich histories of exploitation, independent filmmaking.
Tell us about that, you know, because I know that on occasion, the last couple of years, you've hosted It Made in Dallas, which was it's a film series of films that are made here in and around Dallas. So talk to us about some of the lesser-known exploitation films that were made in Dallas.
Well, the Came From Dallas show, which we're finally going to do again. There are a core number of classics. Actually, the first person to make films in Dallas on a regular basis, narrative films, was an African-American man named Spencer Williams in the 40s. And his films are very, very interesting to study. Some of them were exploitation, and some of them were serious attempts to do, on incredibly limited resources, to do serious films. And then, starting in the late 50s, the treasure trove began with Rock Baby Rocket in '56, which had every rock and roll act in the Dallas area in it, including the Dallas versions of Elvis Presley and the Everly Brothers and Little Richard and stuff like that. That was a one-off by several people. And then Gordon McClendon, who was a radio pioneer, briefly dabbled in movies and made the first of the two famous Dallas drive-in double bills, The Killer Shrews and The Giant Gila Monster, who was then followed by Edgar Ulmer, who was a very famous Hollywood B-movie director who made Beyond the Time Barrier and the amazing Transparent Man double feature here. And then the great Larry Buchanan started working by around the late 50s, early 60s, cranked out many drive-in movies. Some sold directly to TV and some that went to the drive-ins, including The Eye Creature, Zontar Thing from Venus, the one and only Mars Needs Women, Common Law Wife, Free White and 21, the list goes on. A lot of the people who worked on those are still around. Tony Brownrigg's father, S.F. Brownrigg, was another one who made the Don't Look in the Basement, the most famous, one of the most famous drive-in classic gore movies of the 70s, made right here. And I'll take a moment to say that I have a little cameo in the sequel, Don't Look in the Basement 2.
Awesome. Which
was filmed earlier this year and is coming out soon.
Awesome. So you said you work for Blockbuster. You know, how do you feel about the video stores, you know, disappearing? Because video stores for a lot of people were a way of life to go in the 80s and 90s, to go to the video store on either Tuesday morning when the new releases came out or Friday and Saturday. Now we can buy our films off of the internet. We can have them streaming. To me, it's a very impersonal way of doing movies because you can't pick up the boxes. So talk to us about that.
Well, you know, it's always good news, bad news. Every time a new technology comes along, it kicks out some other technology. And, you know, I was there at the beginning of the home video industry when, at the very beginning, Hollywood studios hated it. They didn't want it. They actually tried many legal injunctions to everything from banning the creation of video stores to banning the manufacturer of VCRs.
And I had a friend that owned a video store, and he used to say in the 80s, used to cost him $100, $200 just to get one copy, which most people don't realize.
Yeah, those VHS tapes were very expensive until, the studios decided to play ball with the home video industry and make it to everybody's advantage and create sell-through titles that sold for $19.99 instead of $109.99. The best story I know about that is the first winter. Blockbuster started in 1985 here, which a lot of people think it started in Florida. It didn't. The first store was right here in Dallas. I worked at it. I started out working in the store. We had one copy of The Sound of Music.
Wow.
Everybody wanted to buy it for their mother that first Christmas, wanted to buy, and when we told them, okay, that's about $120 for that VHS tape, jaws would drop, they would go, what? Yeah. But, the studios figured out, there's money to be made here, and the idea of selling videos, $9.99 price points, we figured out the price points and everything. So, I was there for the heyday of the home video industry, and when VHS was king, and I hated to see it. I hated to see all that go away. I still hate to see it go away. Do
you think it's the personalization of going to a video store and looking at the box art? Do you think that that's going to be something that we'll never see again?
Yeah, in as much as that, and even then they were saying, they're saying home video was killing the art of going to movies.
Right.
They said people will stop going to movies entirely. Well, that didn't happen. People are still going. The attendance has fallen off, but they're still spending tons and tons of money at theaters. So it's a different experience, and even I still to this day prefer seeing something. I never miss a chance to see an old classic in a theater. I do miss being able to go to a video store.
You browse through the aisles. You can spend an hour or two there browsing through aisles, looking at the box art, discover something that you've never heard of before.
New release was a big thing.
Yeah.
I remember when Titanic, when that had its video release, it was a huge thing. The box art was great. Technology has replaced that. All regular Blockbuster stores are closed. There are very few, I think, video rental places. There's only 2, I think, in Dallas that I know of.
It's very impersonal because, now you can download something and it's instant gratification.
You don't have to leave your door.
I loved going to the video store, looking at the box art and bringing home something I've never heard before. A great film that I did that once, my first time, was Convoy. I've never heard of the movie Convoy, never heard of the song. I brought it home, loved the film. I guess it would be considered a B movie, but it was...
the Sam Peckinpah?
Yeah.
No, that was an A-budget feature.
Really?
Yeah. That was his next to last film.
So you've always told me a story, and I want you to share the story with our audiences. So tell me about public domain and one film that fell into public domain that Blockbuster couldn't really...
Oh, boy, I'll tell tales out of school, but I'll do it anyway. You're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah. Most people don't know this story.
Oh, boy, Universal may shut down your video here. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but... it was thought by people who study public domain status, and I've been studying it for many years.
Before you start the story, what is public domain for our audience who doesn't
Public domain meaning a movie is no longer copyrighted. And there's copyright status for books, for music, for everything. Movie copyright status is a thing unto itself, and it's been complicated over the years. But on occasion, films fall out of public domain because they were never copyrighted, never had a copyright mark. Copyright was not renewed, or copyright was determined to be defective for some reason or other, legally defective, not enforceable, or everybody involved with a movie dies. There's no one to enforce it anymore. Which isn't going to be the case with a major studio film.
Right.
It was determined by some of the experts. I'm gonna be as gingerly about this as I can.
Oh, please do.
To Kill a Mockingbird was in the public domain. The film. Blockbuster at the time was putting out public domain titles under their own label, and we were preparing to do the same with To Kill a Mockingbird. Us and some other, people who specialize in PD titles. Universal MCA was not real happy about that, as you might well.
And let's just say that Universal now distributes To Kill a Mockingbird. If you want to see it,
Universal MCA expressed their displeasure at that idea.
I just think it's a real interesting story. And this brings me to my next question. Do you think, because of the internet and because of like the archive.org and stuff on Roku and Apple TV and YouTube, do you think public domain has helped the interest of classic and silent films and the popularity of them?
Yes, it did. I mean, there's a lot of people will tell you that's why It's a Wonderful Life became the classic that it is, because it was in the public domain for 30 years or so. And the copyright was restored to it in 1994, I think it was, supposedly. I mean, I've heard some dubious opinions on that, but no, the copyright was restored. But it had built up this enormous following because every single TV station could buy up a copy of it and show it around Christmas time.
Right, for free.
For free. It was in the public domain. And so everybody saw it more than they saw The Wizard of Oz, practically.
Right.
Because only one network was licensed to show that. Everybody could show It's a Wonderful Life. And so there are reasons why a certain number of PD titles have become household standards because of it.
What are some other examples of public domain titles?
Well, I'm not gonna give away too many because that's how I make my living. But probably the second most famous, one of the most famous ones, is Night of the Living Dead.
Okay, yeah.
The original Night of the Living Dead from 1968.
I actually bought a copy from Blockbuster for about $4.99.
It was released without a copyright mark.
Wow.
Hence, it's in the public domain.
Because it was misrepresented, right?
No copyright mark. Period.
Awesome. So
there is no, and that's probably why George Romero produced a remake in 1990. He wanted to have at least one version that was copyrighted.
So let me ask you, we've had a lot of great executives, come and go in Hollywood, Irving Thalberg, Samuel Goldwyn, Louis B. Mayer. Then you had, Jack Valenti, who was the head of the Motion Picture Association. If you had to bring back one executive from the heyday of Hollywood, who would you want to see come back if you had to bring them back from the dead or something? Who would you like to see in power again and why?
I'd probably pick Walt Disney.
Why?
Disney was a vital part of my childhood. My favorite movie as a child was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which was a Disney. Actually, I saw it on its 10-year reissue and thought it was a brand new film when I was a little kid. It wasn't until years later that I discovered it was already 10 years old. I think he did amazing things. And there's tons of criticism about him. You can find that about anybody.
Right.
And I don't care. He did amazing things. I would love to work for Disney. The Disney catalog is just so full of amazing stuff.
It's rich. It's priceless.
So rich. It's so part of the childhood of just about everybody on this planet. Two things are The Wizard of Oz and just about everything Disney did up into the 60s and 70s. And even now, look, they've struck gold again with Frozen.
Yeah.
And they've created things that made the whole world happy. Who wouldn't want to do that?
I think it's amazing. For me, it would be Irving Thalberg. I've always admired Irving Thalberg. He's a sickly man, died at a very young age, but he did a lot in a short period of life that he was here. And I'll go ahead and say this. I just think that if we had the studio system still in place and people like Louis B. Mayer and Thalberg and Goldwyn and even Harry Cohen over at Columbia, I think Hollywood would be a different place. I think we'd be somewhere different than we are now. So what's next for you?
Well, I am busy getting back next week, creating some more tribute videos for Dallas Film Society. And then for the Fort Lauderdale International Film Festival in November for George Hamilton.
Awesome.
For Jason Alexander, for Daniel Baldwin and some others, and may get a call anytime to do another one for somebody.
So what's your website? Where can people find you? And they can search Gordon K. Smith on Facebook.
Getting the real website underway, but you can find me on Facebook. My film Just a Cigar has a Facebook page, Just a Cigar with a question mark. Just a Cigar is such a famous quote that it's been used for a lot of rock bands, and they have Facebook pages, and they're all over YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to add the question mark there. I have a trailer on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel.